Michel Foucault discovered something so disturbing that he spent decades documenting it in secret. He identified 6 specific types of people that the system uses as tools of control, and the most frightening part is that you probably know all of them. These people are not conscious agents of oppression. They sincerely believe they are helping, educating, protecting. But Foucault revealed that it is precisely these good intentions that make control invisible, permanent, and inescapable. Today, I'm going to show you who these 6 people are, how they operate around you without you noticing, and why Foucault believed that recognizing them is the first step toward any genuine freedom. If you're ready to discover these 6 figures of control that shape every aspect of your life, subscribe to this channel where we explore thinkers who reveal the invisible structures of power. Watch the video on your screen now about how to recognize and resist these mechanisms. And if you've ever felt like you're being constantly watched, judged, or shaped by forces you can't name, Foucault has answers that will make you see every social interaction in a completely different way. Foucault didn't start his career looking for mechanisms of control. He was studying the history of madness, trying to understand how societies define who is sane and who is insane. But what he discovered changed everything. He realized that it wasn't the mad who were being studied, but rather how power operates through the classification of people. Foucault wrote in The History of Madness that every society needs to create categories, separate the normal from the abnormal, the acceptable from the unacceptable. And to make this work, the system doesn't use soldiers or police as the primary force. It uses ordinary people who unconsciously embody and reinforce these categories. Foucault's brilliance was realizing that modern power doesn't function through direct repression. It functions through what he called normalization. And normalization requires specific people in specific positions to make you conform voluntarily. These people aren't conspiring against you. They simply occupy structural positions in what Foucault called the architecture of power. And once you see these positions, you begin to understand how control operates in every aspect of your life. The first person the system uses to control you is what Foucault called the examiner. This is the person whose primary function is to constantly measure, evaluate, and classify you. Teachers, managers, doctors, psychologists, recruiters. Foucault documented in Discipline and Punish how these figures appeared historically at the exact moment when modern societies needed new mechanisms of control. Before, power was spectacular and violent, executed in public squares. After, it became subtle, operating through constant examinations that make you self-evaluate and self-correct. The examiner doesn't need to punish you directly. He only needs to create the perpetual possibility of judgment. Think about how a teacher functions. It's not just what he teaches that matters. It's the fact that he's constantly evaluating you, making you internalize the question, am I doing well enough? Foucault realized that the exam transforms people into cases, into objects of knowledge and control. When you are examined, you are no longer just you. You become a set of data, a profile, a grade, a diagnosis. And this transformation is what allows the system to categorize you, compare you with others, and place you in your appropriate place in the hierarchy. But here's what makes the examiner so effective. You begin to examine yourself. Foucault called this disciplinary introspection. You internalize the examiner's gaze and begin to watch yourself constantly, even when no one is looking. You ask yourself before speaking in a meeting, will this make me look incompetent? You evaluate yourself before posting on social media. Will this make me look good in others' eyes? You constantly monitor yourself against standards you didn't even choose, but which the examiner has implanted in your mind. Foucault studied this dynamic extensively in educational institutions. He observed how the school system doesn't exist just to transfer knowledge, but to create what he called docile bodies, people who have learned to behave, to sit quietly, to respond when called, to accept authority without questioning. And the examiner is central to this. Every test, every grade, every performance evaluation isn't just measuring you, it's molding you, training you to accept that your value can be quantified and that you must constantly prove you deserve your place in society. The most disturbing part is that the examiner genuinely believes he's helping. Teachers think they're preparing you for life. Managers think they're developing your potential. Doctors think they're caring for your health, and maybe they are. But Foucault wants you to see the structural function they occupy regardless of their intention. They are the agents that keep you in a constant state of evaluation, always insecure, always striving to meet external standards, never trusting your own internal judgment. The second person the system uses is what Foucault called the confessor. This is the figure who invites you to reveal your most intimate thoughts, your secret desires, your hidden failures. Therapists, priests, counselors, even close friends can occupy this position. Foucault traced the genealogy of confession in his History of Sexuality, showing how the West developed a peculiar obsession with making people talk about themselves, especially about their inner life and their desires. The confessor operates through an apparently benevolent invitation. Come talk to me. I won't judge you. I want to understand you. I want to help you. And you talk. You reveal things about yourself that you might never have articulated. And in the process of speaking, something happens that Foucault considered fundamental to modern control. You become known. You become transparent. Your secrets, your shames, your transgressions, everything is brought to light and catalogued. Foucault argued that confession is not liberating, as modern therapeutic culture makes us believe. It's a technology of power. When you confess, you are voluntarily submitting yourself to another's scrutiny. You are allowing someone to define what your thoughts and feelings mean. The confessor has the power to interpret you to yourself. He can say what you're feeling is depression. It's anxiety. It's a problem that needs to be corrected. And suddenly, experiences you had become pathologies that must be treated. What makes the confessor so powerful is the illusion of intimacy and care. You feel like finally someone understands you. Someone cares. But Foucault reminds us that this relationship is structurally asymmetric. The confessor maintains power over you precisely because you revealed your vulnerabilities. He knows things about you that can be used to categorize you, diagnose you, control you, and even if he never uses this knowledge maliciously, the very structure of confession creates a hierarchy where you are the object to be known and he is the subject who knows. Foucault observed that modern society has dramatically expanded the spaces of confession. It's no longer just in church or in the therapist's office. It's everywhere. Reality shows where people confess their lives to millions. Social media, where you're constantly revealing your thoughts, your locations, your preferences. Job interviews, where you must confess your weaknesses. Dating apps, where you must describe who you are in intimate detail. All are spaces where you are encouraged, even compelled, to reveal yourself, to become known, to become transparent to systems of power. The third person is what Foucault called the normalizer. This is the figure whose function is to constantly remind you of the standards you should follow, the appropriate behaviors, the social expectation. Parents, teachers, co-workers, even strangers on social media can occupy this position. The normalizer operates through constant judgments about what is normal and what is deviant. He doesn't need formal authority. He simply expresses surprise, disapproval, or concern when you're not following the invisible norms that govern social behavior. Foucault documented in his studies on disciplinary institutions how normalization works. It's not through explicit laws or violent punishments. It's through constant micro-adjustments, small corrections, disapproving looks, seemingly innocent comments that make you feel you're out of place. The normalizer says things like, "But everyone does it this way, don't you think you should?" Normal would be, "I'm worried about you because this isn't typical." Each of these statements reinforces the idea that there's a right way to be, and you're deviating from it. The normalizer's power comes from the fact that he's rarely imposing his own personal preferences. He's invoking a collective norm, an imagined consensus about how people should behave. This makes his influence much harder to resist. It's not just one person saying you're wrong. It's the entire society, supposedly, agreeing that you're out of line. Foucault called called this pastoral power, the ability to guide the flock back to the correct path through gentle guidance and constant concern. The normalizer is everywhere in modern life. It's the co-worker who asks why you're not married yet, as if there's something wrong with you. It's the family member who questions your career choices because they don't fit what's expected. It's the online comment that says you're being too sensitive, too aggressive, too different. Each of these moments is an exercise in normalization, an attempt to bring you back to conformity, to make you feel you need to adjust, to be acceptable. Foucault argued that modern society is obsessed with normalization because it needs predictable and manageable populations. Real diversity, genuine authenticity, truly autonomous behavior, all of this is disruptive to systems that depend on conformity to function efficiently. So the system uses normalizers at all social levels to constantly polish the edges, to smooth out differences, to make everyone look a little more like everyone else. And the most frightening part is that this happens not through violent coercion, but through millions of small social pressures that make you want to conform voluntarily. The fourth person the system uses is what Foucault identified as the surveillant. This is the figure whose presence creates the sensation of being constantly observed. Security cameras, supervisors, content moderators, nosy neighbors. But the real power of the surveillant, Foucault discovered, isn't in actually watching you all the time. It's in making you believe you might be being watched at any moment. Foucault developed this idea by studying the panopticon, a prison designed by philosopher Jeremy Bentham. The architecture was ingenious, a central tower where a guard could observe all prisoners, but the prisoners couldn't see the guard. They never knew if they were being watched or not, so they had to act as if they were always being watched. Foucault realized that this structure wasn't just about prisons. It was a model for society as a whole. The modern surveillant doesn't need to literally be looking at you. He just needs you to know that he could be looking. Cameras in stores, internet monitoring, location tracking on your phone, performance evaluations at work, engagement metrics on social media, all create the sensation of perpetual visibility. You begin to modify your behavior not because someone is forcing you, but because you know you could be being observed, evaluated, judged. Foucault called this disciplinary power. It's a type of control that works through the internalization of surveillance. You become your own guard. You begin to police yourself, to censor yourself, to behave in ways that would be approved if someone were watching. And the most efficient part is that this works even when no one is actually paying attention. The mere possibility of observation is enough to modify your behavior. Think about how you act differently when you know you're being filmed versus when you think no one is looking. Think about how you manage your online presence, knowing that potential employers might be looking. Think about how you moderate what you say in work emails, knowing they might be read by other people. You're constantly adjusting yourself for the invisible audience, the surveillant who may or may not be paying attention, but whose potential presence shapes every action you take. Foucault argued that surveillance society isn't about a literal totalitarian Big Brother. It's much more subtle and pervasive. It's a network of small gazes, small judgments, small evaluations that create an atmosphere of constant visibility. And in this atmosphere, you learn to control yourself, to watch yourself, to be the agent of your own discipline. The surveillant has won when you no longer need him to behave. You do it yourself. The fifth person is what Foucault called the expert. This is the figure who claims technical knowledge about you and your life, and uses that knowledge to define what you should be and how you should live. Doctors, nutritionists, life coaches, financial experts, productivity gurus. Foucault studied extensively how specialized knowledge functions as a form of power in his works on biopolitics and governmentality. The expert operates through what Foucault called a regime of truth. He establishes what counts as legitimate knowledge about you. He can say, your BMI indicates you're overweight. Your serotonin levels suggest depression. Your spending habits are financially irresponsible. And these statements carry special weight because they come from someone with credentials, with training, with epistemic authority. You can't simply disagree. Who are you to challenge the expert? What makes the expert particularly powerful is that he medicalizes, pathologizes, and technifies aspects of life that were previously simply part of human experience. Sadness becomes major depressive disorder. Restlessness becomes ADHD. Food preferences become nutritional disorders. Every human experience is translated into technical language that requires specialized intervention. And suddenly, you can no longer trust your own experience. You need the expert to tell you what you're really feeling and what you should do about it. Foucault wasn't arguing that all specialized knowledge is false or useless. He was showing how it functions as power. When you consult an expert, you're submitting yourself to his regime of truth. You're accepting that he has the right to define your reality in technical terms you may not fully understand. And with that definition comes prescription. The expert doesn't just tell you what you are. He tells you what you must do to correct yourself, to optimize yourself, to become closer to the ideal he defined. Modern society has multiplied experts infinitely. Now there are experts for every aspect of human life. How to sleep, how to eat, how to exercise, how to work, how to love, how to raise children, how to age, how to die. Every domain of existence has been colonized by specialized knowledge that tells you that you don't know enough about your own life. You need guidance, intervention, constant optimization based on scientific principles that only experts fully understand. Foucault saw this as part of what he called biopolitics, the control of population through the management of biological life. The expert is the local agent of biopower. He tells you how to live your life in ways that are supposedly for your own good, but that also make you a more manageable, more predictable, more useful subject for the system. You become a project of perpetual optimization, always trying to reach the standards that experts establish, never questioning whether these standards serve your interests or the interests of larger forces. The sixth and most insidious person the system uses to control you is what Foucault called the entrepreneur of the self. This is the most dangerous one because this person is you. Foucault identified in late modernity a fundamental transformation. Power no longer needs to be imposed from outside. You become the agent of your own control, disciplining yourself, optimizing yourself, shaping yourself according to the system's demands, all while believing you're exercising freedom and autonomy. Foucault explored this idea in his lectures on neoliberal governmentality. He showed how the modern system no longer just wants docile bodies that obey orders. It wants entrepreneurs of the self, people who treat their lives as businesses to be managed, their skills as human capital to be developed, their relationships as networks to be optimized. You're no longer controlled through external discipline. You're controlled through internalized incentives and imperatives that make you control yourself voluntarily. Think about how you talk about yourself, my personal brand, my network, my market value, investing in myself. You've completely internalized the logic of the market and applied it to your own existence. You see yourself as a product to be developed, marketed, sold. And this feels empowering, feels like you're taking control of your life. But Foucault asks you to see what's really happening. You've become both the product and the manager, both the worker and the supervisor, constantly monitoring yourself, evaluating yourself, adjusting yourself to maximize your competitiveness in the market. The entrepreneur of the self never rests. There's always something more to do, more to learn, more to optimize. Your free time becomes personal development time. Your hobbies become side hustles. Your relationships become networking opportunities. Everything in life is instrumentalized, transformed into capital, evaluated by its contribution to your overall value as an economic unit. And you do this to yourself. No one needs to force you. You genuinely believe this is the right way to live, that you're maximizing your potential, realizing your freedom. Foucault saw this as the most sophisticated form of control humanity has ever developed. It's not repression, it's production, The system doesn't tell you no, it tells you yes, you can be anything, as long as you work hard enough, develop yourself enough, optimize yourself enough, and you work tirelessly, not because you're being forced, but because you've completely internalized the system's values and goals as your own. You've become the perfect agent of your own control. The most disturbing part is that the entrepreneur of the self experiences failure not as system failure, but as personal failure. If you're not succeeding, it's not because the system is unfair or conditions are difficult. It's because you didn't work hard enough, didn't develop yourself enough, weren't entrepreneurial enough in relation to yourself. You internalize all failures and externalize all the power structures that make failure likely. It's the perfect control mechanism. The system never needs to be held accountable because you're already blaming yourself. Now that you've seen the 6 people the system uses to control you, the question Foucault leaves us with is disturbing. What to do with this knowledge? Foucault didn't offer a simple revolutionary plan. He didn't believe you could simply escape power because power is everywhere, operating through every social relation. But he believed that recognizing these figures and their functions was the first step toward what he called practices of freedom. Practices of freedom for Foucault don't mean being completely free of power. That's impossible. It means developing a critical relationship with the powers that operate on you. It means asking, why do I accept this? Where does this norm come from? Who benefits when I conform? What are the alternatives I've been told don't exist? Foucault called this the critical attitude, a constant disposition to question, to resist, to experiment with different ways of being. When you recognize the examiner, you can begin to question the standards by which you're being judged. Are they really measures of value, or are they arbitrary? When you recognize the confessor, you can choose what to reveal and what to keep private, reclaiming some opacity in a world that demands total transparency. When you recognize the normalizer, you can decide that normal isn't necessarily good and that deviation isn't necessarily bad. When you recognize the surveillant, you can create spaces of invisibility where you're not constantly performing for an imagined audience. When you recognize the expert, you can trust more in your own experience and less in technical regimes of truth. And when you recognize the entrepreneur of the self, you can stop optimizing yourself for a moment and simply exist. Foucault believed that freedom is not a state to be achieved, but a constant practice of creative resistance. It's finding small ways not to be governed like that, not that way, not by those people, not for those purposes. It's experimenting with different ways of living that the experts' manuals don't prescribe. It's creating relationships that don't follow normalization scripts. It's valuing aspects of yourself that don't contribute to your productivity or market value. It's fundamentally refusing to be completely known, completely visible, completely optimized. Foucault's work on these 6 figures of control is more relevant today than ever. We live in an era of unprecedented surveillance, of total quantification of life, of constant optimization, of compulsory transparency. Technologies have changed, but the power structures Foucault identified have only deepened. Algorithms are examiners that constantly evaluate you. Social media are confession spaces where you voluntarily reveal everything about yourself. Influencers are normalizers who show you how you should live. Cameras and digital tracking are omnipresent surveillance. Health and productivity apps are experts that tell you how to optimize every aspect of life. And hustle culture transforms you into an entrepreneur of the self who never stops working on your own improvement. But seeing these structures is the first step in creating some room for maneuver within them. Foucault didn't promise total liberation. He offered something more modest and more realistic. The ability to live with a little more awareness about the forces that shape you, and with that, the ability to resist, to deviate, to create small spaces of genuine freedom in a world that wants to make you completely governable. The 6 people the system uses to control you are around you now. Some of them might be people you love, who care for you, who genuinely want your well-being. This makes Foucault's analysis so disturbing. Modern power doesn't operate through malicious villains. It operates through well-intentioned people performing structural functions that keep the system running. Recognizing this doesn't mean rejecting all these people or becoming paranoid about every social interaction. It means developing what Foucault called lucidity, the ability to see clearly the forces at play while continuing to live and relate to others. Foucault's great contribution was showing that power isn't just something that oppresses you from above. It's something that circulates through every relation, that you reproduce every time you examine someone, every time you normalize someone, every time you confess, every time you watch yourself, every time you claim expertise, every time you optimize yourself. We are all simultaneously subjects and agents of power. And recognizing this is liberating in a strange way. You're not a powerless victim of a monolithic system. You're a participant in power relations that can, at least partially, be modified, resisted, transformed. If you've made it this far, you've already begun the practice Foucault considered essential. You're thinking critically about structures that usually remain invisible. You're questioning what is normally accepted without thinking. This is what Foucault called the courage of truth, the willingness to look honestly at uncomfortable realities about how control operates. And this courage is the starting point for any genuine freedom. Comment below which of the 6 people you recognize most clearly in your own life. This recognition is the beginning of something important, the ability to live with a little more awareness and a little less automatic conformity. Remember, Foucault wasn't offering paranoia or cynicism. He was offering clarity. The 6 people the system uses to control you aren't enemies to be destroyed. They're functions to be recognized, understood, and when possible, resisted. Power is everywhere, but so is resistance. And where there is power, Foucault insisted, there is always the possibility of freedom. The question isn't whether you're subject to power. You are. The question is how you're going to respond to it. With unconscious conformity or with creative resistance. The choice, at least partially, is yours. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.